Destiny has always been known for his willingness to engage with people across the political spectrum, even those who carry reputations so toxic that most would never sit in the same room with them.
Speak to him for a lot longer than I thought I'd be able to afterwards. But I'm going to be honest, I feel like he completely convinced me of term limits. Every time I hear people talk about term limits, I feel like people talk about term limits as though, I don't know, like people just shouldn't be in office for so long because it's bad for democracy, or it's not right, or lobbyists, or some retarded he had an interesting take on it, though. Maybe this is a more popular take, and I've just never heard it before. But basically, and it started to sync up with a lot of stuff that I've seen recently, especially with Pelosi and Schumer and AOC, to where the incumbent advantage in being a congressman is huge. It's unreal. And his knowledge of like all the people in the House, I mean, obviously he was in the House of Representatives, so he should know, but his knowledge of all the people in the House and all the race and everything was pretty good too. Something you pointed out that was interesting, though, is there are a lot of people who are in Congress who will be in Congress for generations only because they have the incumbent advantage now. And that he had examples, but I don't remember them. I just don't know all the House people. But he had examples of like, as soon as that person dropped out or somebody else slipped in, boom, it switched. And that there are the composition of Congress. And then there's an argument to be made down the line here. The effectiveness of Congress is hardcore mediated by term limits because of the fact that once a person gets there, they're almost guaranteed to win, or they have such a high likelihood of being there for so fucking long that it morphs the way that they approach being an effective legislator. I thought that was an interesting take. I shouldn't say interesting, actually. That swapped my mind on term limits. And I think I am in favor of term limiting people just on the back of that argument. I don't know if, or even just consecutive term limits, maybe, yeah. For which branch of government? Also the judicial? No, I think judicial, I still think lifetime appointments are good for judicial. But for Congress, yeah, that actually was a pretty compelling argument. There was one other thing he said too. That I also thought was interesting. I gave him a counter argument, but he said that was fine. He was willing to bite the bullet on it. Another thing he said was, when it comes to passing, he had two other things. We didn't talk about any of this on the show. I wonder if just by being in Congress, maybe just like learn things. There are two things he said. One was, if Congress can't pass a spending bill, if Congress isn't able to fund the government for any reason whatsoever, every single person in Congress is term limited out for the next election, because it's like a fundamental aspect of their job. And I think my response was something along the lines of like, okay, well, what if there's like a minority or something and they know that they've got a more favorable election coming up and they purposely don't? And he's like, that's all part of like legislating. Then you should be able to have your strong majorities or hold the party responsible. It's like, okay, that's interesting. If you can't pass a spending bill, then you. And then a second thing he said that I thought was interesting is there should never, ever, ever be huge spending bills. It should be, I don't know how many appropriations committees. He said 13. Are there 13 committees or whatever in the House? He said that there should be 13 different spending bills every spending cycle, and it should never be one giant bill, because he says when things are in one giant bill, it's much harder to actually have a public debate or have negotiation over stuff that shows up in appropriations, because who the f knows? There's just huge spending bills that get passed every cycle and everybody argues, kind of like, I don't want to say behind the scenes, it's not necessarily hidden, but like we just don't see it because it's such a huge spending bill. But he said that if it was different appropriations committees passing 12 or 13 different spending bills every single spending cycle, where each bill is talking about like whatever different parts of the government need to be funded, that the conversations and then the effective legislation being passed would be way better. Yeah, I don't know. I thought these were some interesting. Did your opinion of Santos change after talking with him? I don't know. We didn't push too hard on the on the convictions, I should say, I guess. He said it was essentially for wire fraud of like $47,000. He said the way he was charged. I told him, I haven't looked into it, and I don't believe anything unless I read out the underlying documents. So I didn't have a strong opinion on that. But the opinions on government, those three things I think were pretty important. I think my mind was changed on every single point there. I think having multiple, well, I didn't have a strong opinion on a spending bill before, but having multiple spending bills, I think would be way better. Term limiting every single person in Congress if they can't pass a spending bill, I think would be good. And term limits to make sure that there is new blood that's being cycled into Congress, and it forces citizens to pay a little bit more attention in their elections. They can't just vote for the name that they recognize every time, I think would be better. Yeah, I think I like all three of those ideas. Did you know Santos is the same age as you? Yeah, I think he's 6 or 7 months older. How would you address the anti-term limit arguments that, one, institutional knowledge is important, and two, the longer you serve, the more relationships you can build with the other side? The institutional knowledge, I think we would disagree here, because also pushed further, and he said that every single bureaucrat should be cycled out as well. Is the least popular take ever, but I don't give a those that know, and those that want to debate it can debate it. I think the bureaucratic state is really important. I think that it's important to have people behind the scenes who know how to keep everything functioning, and that ideally you have a strong entrenched bureaucratic state that knows how to operate things, and when you elect new politicians, they're able to come in and they're able to implement their agenda and then have the bureaucrats effectively basically carry it out, right? Because if you're cycling in new bureaucrats all the time, you're never going to get anything done because nobody knows how anything works. So I think having an important foundation of staffers and everything is really important. And hopefully that would be able to keep up with, I guess, the institutional knowledge there. Oh, we brought up another thing too. We didn't talk about any of these really, what I thought were,
His conversation with George Santos was one of those rare moments where an unexpected voice managed to alter his perspective in a meaningful way. For years, the topic of term limits has been treated as little more than a political football. Critics and activists alike throw it around whenever entrenched figures like Pelosi or McConnell make the news, but the actual mechanics of how term limits could reshape Congress are rarely explored in serious detail. What made the discussion between Destiny and Santos notable was not that they agreed on everything, but that Santos presented arguments compelling enough to completely shift Destiny's outlook on one of the most contentious structural debates in American politics. The first and most powerful point that struck Destiny was the sheer weight of incumbent advantage in Congress. Once a politician wins office, the odds of them losing re-election plummet to near zero in most districts. The reasons are obvious: name recognition, fundraising pipelines, loyal party machinery, and the inertia of voters who would rather stick with what they know than risk the unknown. Santos, being an insider, painted a vivid picture of just how entrenched these figures become. His examples, though not fully remembered by Destiny, were clear enough to demonstrate that Congress was often less a dynamic institution responsive to voter needs and more a museum of political figures whose names have sat on ballots for decades. That stagnant cycle, Santos argued, doesn't just hurt democracy, it mutates the incentives of legislators themselves. When re-election is all but guaranteed, the urgency to legislate in a way that benefits the public recedes, and in its place grows an obsession with holding onto power indefinitely. This point alone was enough to sway Destiny into supporting term limits, something he had long been skeptical of. The shift was not rooted in abstract theory, but in a practical recognition that Congress is shaped as much by the security of incumbency as by ideology or policy debate. Fresh blood, Santos contended, isn't just about diversity of thought. It's about breaking the iron grip of those who wield power with the comfort of knowing that no serious challenger is waiting in the wings. Santos didn't stop there. He proposed an idea radical enough that Destiny admitted he had never considered it before: automatic term limits for every single member of Congress if they collectively fail to pass a spending bill. Government shutdowns have become routine features of American politics, often orchestrated by small factions willing to hold the nation hostage for ideological gain. The notion that failure to accomplish the most basic responsibility, funding the government, should mean instant electoral expiration for every lawmaker was both brutal and refreshingly direct. It reframed legislative gridlock not as a matter of partisan gamesmanship, but as a fundamental breach of duty. The simplicity of the proposal resonated with Destiny. If elected officials cannot perform the bare minimum function of governance, why should they be allowed the privilege of re-election? Another striking point involved the nature of appropriations themselves. Instead of one massive omnibus bill stuffed with unrelated riders and pork barrel spending, Santos argued for multiple, smaller bills tied directly to the various appropriations committees. This approach would break down the opaque process where hundreds of billions of dollars are lumped together in giant packages that most legislators haven't even read. By forcing Congress to pass multiple targeted bills, the process would become more transparent, debates more substantive, and accountability harder to dodge. For Destiny, this argument was both intuitive and convincing. Large spending bills have long been criticized for the hidden deals they contain, but hearing it framed as a structural flaw rather than simply a political trick shifted his understanding of the issue. These 3 points: incumbent advantage, the punishment mechanism for failing to fund government, and the restructuring of spending bills, formed the backbone of Santos's argument, and by Destiny's own admission, they changed his mind entirely. The encounter was not just about the abstract question of term limits, but about rethinking the very mechanics of governance in a way that aligns power with responsibility. Of course, Santos himself is a figure shrouded in controversy. His legal troubles, fabrications, and reputation as a serial liar make him one of the most polarizing politicians in recent memory. Destiny acknowledged this reality, but separated the man's personal baggage from the substance of his arguments. In fact, part of what made the interaction fascinating was that someone as tainted as Santos could nevertheless articulate points strong enough to shift an entrenched opinion. It demonstrated that even the most unlikely voices can contribute meaningfully to political debate if one is willing to listen critically rather than dismiss outright. Yet the discussion also revealed where Destiny drew the line. When Santos suggested extending term limits to bureaucrats, Destiny pushed back firmly. Unlike elected officials, bureaucrats provide the institutional knowledge necessary to keep the machinery of government running. Cycling them out constantly would lead to chaos, as incoming staffers would have no idea how to maintain continuity across administrations. For Destiny, the stability of the bureaucratic state was essential, and no amount of populist reform could justify dismantling that backbone. It was a clear moment where agreement ended, but it also highlighted the value of conversation itself. Ideas could be exchanged, challenged, and refined without devolving into ideological purity tests. The broader implications of this discussion are hard to ignore. American politics is drowning in tribalism, where ideas are judged not on their merit, but on the identity of the person speaking them. Santos, tainted as he is, should by all accounts be dismissed outright. Yet Destiny's willingness to engage and even be persuaded illustrates a critical skill lacking in today's discourse: the ability to analyze arguments free from bias. If someone as polarizing as Santos can make valid points, then perhaps the problem isn't just bad actors, but a culture unwilling to separate arguments from personalities. Term limits, in this context, become more than just a technical reform. They symbolize a demand for dynamism, accountability, and renewal in a system that too often rewards stagnation. Incumbents who sit in office for decades are less representatives of the people than managers of their own longevity. By introducing rotation, new perspectives can emerge, complacency can be challenged, and the machinery of democracy can be forced to remain alive rather than calcified.